Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, just Directing Drivers' Attention, a State Highway Safety Office Roadmap for Combating Distracted Driving. Today we'll go over GHSA's new report in broad strokes and follow that up with a conversation for more detail about this pervasive issue. The report that we're discussing today was made possible with funding from General Motors. And now I'm pleased to introduce Hal Garling, Senior Manager in Corporate Grantmaking at General Motors.
Hi, Kerry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you see
Are you
me?
able to turn your, and your camera is on too. That's excellent.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me, and super glad to be here to do just a quick welcome and quick introduction. Give some background about what we're doing here at General Motors, and why we are so thrilled to be partnering with GHSA when it comes to this distracted driving report. So I just have a few slides to share, and if you can go to the next slide, I will talk about our overall vision as a company. So those of you that are familiar with General Motors, or if you hear of us in the headlines, this has been our vision for the last few years, and we call it the 3 zeros internally, but it really is this whole concept of a future of zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. And so we know that that's a lofty goal, but we also know that it's really obtainable. And so in order to make that possible, there's just a lot of different moving parts that we have to do, both as a business and also the work that we do philanthropically to help move the needle in each of these spaces. So if you go to the next slide, Kerry, you'll see that this is a global growth strategy that was established in order to realize this vision of zero crashes, zero emissions, zero congestion. And what it's really showing is all of these working parts, keeping customers at the center of everything that we do, and all of these working parts needing to work together in order to realize this vision. And so what was really awesome for us to see, particularly myself, who is on the corporate giving team, is that social impact and the things that we do to invest in communities is a component of the global growth strategy. And so it's just really great to see that in order to fulfill this vision, we got to, also think about what we do with our nonprofit partners. So if you go to the next slide, corporate giving is a part of the social impact. So, within our corporate giving space, we focus on very specific focus areas. And so obviously we're headquartered in Detroit, and so we're going to take care of the Motor City. We've been here for over 100 years. So Detroit will always remain one of our key focus areas. But in addition to that, we also prioritize 4 other focus areas, being STEM education, vehicle and road safety, community development, and most recently, climate equity. We do all of this while being very intentional and emphasizing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we formally established a Justice and Inclusion Fund in 2020 to help promote our work in the DE&I space. So if we go to the next slide here, this is a social impact model that we follow. So all of our focus areas establish social outcomes that each of our nonprofit partners needs to be able to demonstrate that they, the funded work that they're doing aligns to one of them, at least one of them. And so in the world of vehicle and road safety, you'll see there that there are 3 different social outcomes that we prioritize. The increase in seatbelt usage is one of those. A decrease in impaired and distracted driving is the second one, and then the third one is the increase in and awareness of safe road environments. So when we were partnering with the Governor's Highway Safety Association, we were looking for what projects can we support that move the needle within one of these social outcomes. So if we go to the next slide, This just then shows, some examples of the partners that we have within each of those social outcomes. And so, we work with the National Organizations for Youth Safety to do a Seatbelt Saves Challenge annually. And so, when we're looking for, a partner that's really helping us move the needle within seatbelt usage and the increase in awareness of seatbelt usage, noise is, one of those that we're proud to be able to highlight. And then, in the increased awareness of safe road environments, we are recently partnering with the National Volunteer Fire Council. They approached us and they had a project where they wanted to educate and train volunteer fire departments on how to respond to an electric vehicle incident on the road. And we have this vision of an all-electric future, and so it makes sense that we would partner with a organization that's really trying to educate not only volunteer fire departments but also just society on the safety around an electric vehicle. So we're really proud to highlight that partnership as well. And then of course, why we're here today is our partnership with the Governor's Highway Safety Association. So last year we were really looking to grow and diversify our portfolio a little bit, and we recognized that there was a gap for us in working with organizations that were really trying to emphasize the dangers of distracted driving. So we approached GHSA. We had a very fruitful conversation, which ended up resulting in why we're here today. So Kerry, I don't know if I have another slide or not, but I think that's it. But again, I'm just happy to be able to always happy to be able to talk about what we're doing here at General Motors. We're very thrilled for this partnership, and we are very thrilled to see where this report goes and the opportunities that it brings. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Hal. We appreciate your support, and we think that this report is a great outcome. So we'll dig into a little bit about the report. Hal, you are off the hook if you'd like to go off camera. What we're going to do is talk a little bit about the scope of the problem and then the overview of the report. So according to the Fatality Analysis Reporting System, or FARS, there was an increase of about 1% of people losing their lives in crashes due to distracted driving in 2020 from 2019. But we know that there are far more injuries than fatalities. In 2020, well over 364,000 people were injured in crashes involving distracted drivers. So we know that these crashes are grossly underreported, and this underreporting really undercuts efforts to address it and creates a false perception about the persistent and dangerous nature of this highway safety problem. And that's one reason why GHSA knew that we had to tackle the issue of distracted driving, and we are most thankful to General Motors for making it happen. It has been over a decade since our last report addressing distracted driving. This report is our most comprehensive look at the issue. And it's broken out really into two main sections: factors affecting distracted driving and challenges. And the challenges section then addresses the findings from a state highway safety office survey, highlights what states can do, promotes promising practices, and really weaves recommendations throughout. So while the recommendations, which are on pages 6 and 7 of the report, are for state highway safety offices, there's a really strong emphasis on partnerships. So we broke it down into 7 recommendation categories. They are distracted driving laws, data, education and outreach, enforcement, infrastructure, competing highway priorities and funding, and of course, leadership and partner support. Well, we know that distraction is not limited to technology. It includes any activity that has a driver take their eyes off the road or their hands off the wheel. So looking at this list, it's really easy to understand why efforts to document and measure distracted driving are so challenging. This look at prevalence at risk during the seconds leading up to a crash clearly illustrates that while many secondary activities, such as reaching for something or eating or drinking, negatively impact driver safety, the use of handheld electronic devices presents both high use rates and high risk. I'm sure you'll find it no surprise at all that the four main factors affecting distracted driving are driver attitudes and directions, laws and regulations, law enforcement, and vehicle and wireless technology. The latest AAA Traffic Safety Culture Index found that 4 out of 5 drivers believe that talking on a handheld cell phone is extremely or very dangerous, but 37% of them do it anyway. And nearly all drivers, 95%, said that reading or typing a text or email on a handheld cell phone while driving is extremely or very dangerous. Well, despite this, almost 1 out of 4, 23%, reported typing or sending an email or text on a handheld cell phone at least once in the past 30 days. And 34% said they read on a handheld device while driving. State highway safety offices were asked to identify challenges to effectively addressing distracted driving, and here are the top 3 that they said. The first is the disconnect between driver attitudes about the danger of distracted driving and their actual behavior, which is exactly what we saw on the previous slides. The second is difficulty enforcing distracted driving laws. And the third is inadequate penalties or non-existent distracted driving laws. Other challenges included a lack of distracted driving data, and we know that this is a critical need. Another one is completing highway safety priorities. It's no surprise that lack of funding and restrictions on the use of federal funds is a challenge, as well as lack of tools and resources, leadership, and partner support. But despite these challenges, state highway safety offices and their partners are identifying and implementing strategies to combat distracted driving. But what can you do? We are going to stop showing the presentation, and I'd like to introduce our 2 speakers for today. We have Russ Martin, Senior Director of Policy and Government Relations at GHSA, and Jennifer Smith, the CEO President of StopDistractions.org. So welcome, it's nice to see you all today.
Absolutely, thanks for having us.
Great, well, Jennifer, you've been a leader in distracted driving for almost distracted driving prevention, not distracted driving, distracted driving prevention for almost 15 years. And while you're well known, there may be a few people out there who aren't familiar with your story. So would you mind sharing it?
Yeah, definitely. September 2008, I was a real estate agent, so I was always on my phone when I drove. I wasn't texting or anything yet. Adults, we didn't do that so much in 2008. The iPhone had just come out the year before. But I got a phone call that day. My mom had been involved in a crash, and she'd been hit by a driver who was talking on their cell phone. So I started to work with other families, sharing our stories and just getting involved so we can, prevent this from happening to someone else. And that's what I still do to this day. I work with families to try to bring, change and make everyone realize this can happen to someone you love.
Well, that kind of culminated with what you're doing today. So can you tell us a little bit about StopDistractions.org and also how you work with our states?
Yeah, definitely. So StopDistractions.org, we are a network of victims' families. We're just located all over the country at every intersection, every city, every state. There's probably a crash that's happened there that someone's been involved with a distracted driver. And so what we do is we work with the states, one, to help those families share their stories. If there's community events, if there's school events, if there's any types of events where just that public education could be important, we help connect them and help them get out and share their stories. We also help in the states in getting those important laws passed. It's taken a long time to get the laws to where we need them as the technology has continued to evolve. So the laws have needed to evolve. We finally figured out, I think, that recipe that's going to cover these laws and cover these devices even as they continue to evolve, the many different uses. And so that's what we're seeing now as states working to pass those new and better and more current laws. And we get those families together really to lead those efforts and bring coalitions of people together in order to accomplish that, which then leads to all the other pieces you need with the education, the awareness, the enforcement. It all is a constantly moving machine that has to continue to work together.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, that's one of the reasons why, we wrote this report. But one of the report's conclusions was that distracted driving is kind of a traffic safety failure. Russ, we're doing a lot, but we can't really tell what's working. And the issue is really kind of fading into the background. What do you think about this? Is that a fair diagnosis from the report?
I think it is. So if you consider just about any metric we use to measure progress in preventing distracted driving, we're not making progress. The number of distracted driving involved crashes seems to be increasing, or at least staying around the same. I think in the long term, over the last 10 years or so, it's been about the same proportion of fatal crashes that have involved distracted driving. We also see observed changes in observed distracted driving behavior. It seems like more people are physically manipulating wireless devices rather than talking on the phone. So that seems to be increasing as well. And even if you just disregard all the statistics or think that they're incomplete, if you go out and drive on any road here in the United States and pull up to a stoplight and look around you into other cars, you'll see people manipulating devices. So it's one of those things that I think everyone does, even when they disapprove of it and are strongly supportive of laws, everyone is still engaged in this distracted driving behavior. And we, as highway safety advocates, we're passing laws, we're improving laws, we're enforcing them. We have countless public education efforts out there trying to get people to change their attitudes about distracted driving. And it's really hard to say it's whether or not any of that is working, either from a clinical evaluation perspective or just from our collective anecdotal experience. So it's a failure. It's like we're not doing enough to achieve our goals.
Yeah, and I think that we saw that with the AAA index that we saw, where people know that it's a problem, but they do it anyway. It's kind of do as I say, not as I do. So I have a question first for Jennifer, and then Russ, I'd like for you to share your thoughts. Has the overwhelming focus on electronic devices really distorted how most people think about distracted driving? Because it's more than just our phones.
Well, I not really, just because it's the phone use that's spiraling out of control that we're constantly having to catch up on. I mean, yes, all the other things we're doing in the car is distracting, and we shouldn't be doing that. But the prevalence of us all eating a cheeseburger at the same time every day, all day, it's not the same. And what's happening in our brain and how we're distracted and disconnected from the fact that we're driving does warrant that phone and those devices getting more attention, because it is just like impaired driving. It is an impairment. I think one thing that we have gotten caught is the specificity of the task that we're doing. Because in the early days, it was don't use your phone, don't text and drive, don't text and drive. And you'll get people today saying, oh, well, I don't text and drive, but they're on social media, they're scrolling, they're doing other things while they're driving, even emailing, but they're not texting per se. Now we have people, and this has even happened in state legislatures, where we've had bill sponsors of distracted driving bills caught driving on Zoom meetings. And it's just, it didn't click to them that was also distracted driving, even if they were just, had it on the screen and were driving, but were focusing on driving, they had their seatbelt on. But it's the constantly changing definition of how we're using those devices, and that's distracted, that we've got to keep people understanding. No matter what you're doing with that device, it's distracted. You need to be focused on the road.
I think Jennifer's right. Certainly from the perspective of the way that we want people to begin to think about distraction is obviously not just wireless devices, but it's a wide range of the potential sources of distraction, which I think, Kerry, you hit on in your introduction. But yeah, I mean, things change. The technology changes, the thing you can do with it. I mean, I just off my head, I think about if anyone remembers the fears about Pokemon Go. People were driving around doing Pokemon Go. That was a Pokemon Go summer, but now that's kind of gone, right? There's been tic-tac challenges involving driving that have come and gone. Now, since 2020, everyone's using Zoom, so maybe there's this uptick of people using Zoom meetings. So things that we do with these devices are going to change over time. There's going to be things in the future that we can't even foresee now, but we do need to establish kind of a baseline culture around potential sources of distraction if we're going to do anything about it.
Yeah, I think you're right. We have this culture of acceptance, but also I would say this culture of blindness as to what distraction is. You know, I think that, Jennifer, your point about a lot of people don't think that doing social media is distraction, because in the beginning our messages really were about texting, and there's so much that we don't know, right? So it's an ongoing issue, and we can see that it's kind of ever evolving from Pokemon to whatever you want to do today. So, you know, one of the things that we know is a real challenge is having really good data. So let's talk a little bit about data. Russ, we know that it's lacking, not the data itself, but kind of how to get the distracted driving data on both prevalence and risk. So how do you think that the lack of data has shaped how we really approach the issue of distracted driving?
Sure. Well, I'm not going to go into like all the shortcomings of data. You could read our report to get all the details. But I think that when we go to make changes related to distracted driving, the first question that we're often asked or we seek to answer is, what does the data say about this? And we don't have really great answers for that. I mean, we have what we have, and we have to always say that we know it's incomplete, but like, what can you do with that? And so and Jennifer can probably attest to this, when you go to a state legislator to get them to pass a law, you try to present data about how prevalent is distracted driving or what the risks are, and they may say, well, we're not going to take action because we don't know what the problem is. We don't have good data. You know, we can't pass this law because we don't know enough about it. And I think in many ways it becomes a crutch or a limitation or a barrier, because we may never have perfect data about distracted driving or a grand unified theory of how visual and cognitive and it all fits together, but we know it's happening out there. We know that it's killing people and in crashes on our roadways. So how can we move past this? It's not quite an obsession, but it's a preoccupation with trying to get better data or perfect data. I think it's probably more important for us to be taking more action to prevent distracted driving rather than to understand it. As controversial a view as that might be, but I think we just need to think about it a little bit differently.
Yeah, and you know, the idea of perfection being the enemy of good actually really rolls nicely into my next question for Jennifer, which is, you know, states are increasingly looking at how to achieve more equitable outcomes in highway safety. And so how have you seen that addressed in the legislative discussions that are going on?
Yeah, well, that has been coming up in many of the states' legislation. I think the first time I had heard an amendment being proposed to promote some type of equity in enforcement, accountability for that, was way back in Florida when we were trying to pass a no texting law. Since then, it's been adapted in many other states, and I think for distracted driving, hands-free legislation is the first model law in this country that we do have equitable language and protections in the model language of the bill. There is a data tracking amendment that's put in there where they track the ethnicity of the driver on the citations, and that is reviewed once a year and sent in an annual report to make sure that the demographics line up and that no one is being disproportionately issued citations. If there are then problems, those can be addressed wherever or however they may be coming up. So that's one protection in there. There are also search protections, which one is telling the driver, you don't have to show me your phone because you violated that, you know, I'm giving you this ticket, blah, 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 and additional protections on the vehicle. So getting those protections in, we've worked with the heads of the Black Caucus in many of the states that we're getting these successfully passed, and we get support. It's about being fair and accountability. And so we have been successfully working in many states to get these passed. It's again, and it's from sitting down at the table at the beginning to make sure all the concerns are addressed from all parties involved. And that's where we're starting to see success.
Yeah, I think that that's a really kind of nice way to go when it comes to really implementing change, and it's incremental and it has to be inclusive. So getting getting the right voices to the table, and then also listening to them once they're there. So we're going to take a little bit of a shift away from legislative, which is ironic because I'm going to talk to Russ, who is our legislative expert here at GHSA. But can you describe GHSA's efforts to promote, equity and engagement in highway safety?
Absolutely. So obviously, equity and engagement, it's not just limited to distracted driving, but it touches all areas of highway safety. And in the last couple of years, we've seen a renewed emphasis and a renewed focus on equitable outcomes and how can we implement programs to achieve more equitable outcomes. This, of course, arose out of circumstances related to police enforcement and traffic enforcement. But as GHSA has dived into this more deeply, it of course touches all areas of everything that our members and our partners are involved in. And so it's been a priority for our association. In the last few years, we've put out statements and reports that aim to provide best practices and recommendations for things that our members can do to improve in this area. Last summer, we released a report that was an analysis of national fatality data, describing how minority groups are disproportionately impacted by traffic crashes. We thought it was important to determine the extent to which that is a problem and point out the way we need to provide better services, traffic safety services to these communities. And then another report last summer was a list of more in-depth recommendations for achieving equitable outcomes. And it's a lot of the same things that Jennifer mentioned. Programs to collect race data about traffic stops so that we can quantify and what otherwise might be anecdotal perceptions of disparities, and you can quantify it and you can take action. You can improve your programs or change your programs to reduce those disparities. We are recommending that highway safety offices and their partners focus more on the highway safety problems that pose the greatest crash risks. So, impaired driving, distracted driving, speeding, lack of restraint use. We want to move away from using traffic laws as a way to engage in pretextual traffic stops. And that bears out in the data too. When you have purposeful mobilizations that are focused on these very specific highway safety threats, we're not seeing disparities in the data. We see disparities in the data in general enforcement activity when police are using other reasons to pull drivers over. And it's typically these things like low-level offenses, like things hanging from the rearview mirror, window tinting, license plates being obscured. These are not causes of the vast majority of crashes. And to build on what Jennifer shared, we're also seeing some trade-off there. I was told recently by someone who's active in state legislative advocacy that one of the costs for them advancing their bill is to repeal some of those pretextual offenses. Maybe that's just the cost of trying to make progress in these more important areas. So there's a lot going on. GHSA's members and state highway safety officers are looking at the programs to see how we can involve more diverse voices in highway safety planning and get community buy-in and make sure that we're implementing programs in communities where it's needed the most and trying to achieve these reforms in the way that we partner with, certainly in the way that we partner with traffic enforcement subrecipients. So there's a lot going on. It's probably going to be going on for many, many years, if not indefinitely. I think there's just a new way that we're looking at how we implement highway safety programs, but it's important work and I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and those are some great resources. So you can go to our website, ghsa.org, and you can look under publications or type equity in the search bar. And those reports are available, and we'd love for you to look at them, use them, and share them. There's a lot of good information out there, and we think really relevant to what people are doing today. So, we're going to take another right-hand turn. And this is for both of you. I don't know which one of you would like to take it first. Russ, I'm just going to go with you since I, for the last twofer, had Jennifer go. Ever since we've had distractions caused by technology, we've been talking about technology as a solution. So what are your thoughts on relying on that technology, and where are we going from here?
So there have been a number of promising technological solutions proposed to help address distracted driving. You may remember in the mid to late aughts that there was this boom of cell phone blocking apps and all these startups that were offering apps, right? And then it was kind of co-opted by a lot of wireless providers. And I think now, even on the iPhone now, I think it's a standard feature. But that, of course, relies on people to actually either download the app or and turn on the feature. They need to want to do it. At the same time, you had automakers making it easier for people to use hands-free functionality in the vehicle with systems that were built into the dashboard. And there's been research led by AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety that has shown that it's possible to design these hands-free systems in a way to reduce cognitive distraction. So that is hopefully helpful. But at the same time, we also have seen new sources of distraction emerge, either through trends that really don't have anything to do with driving or safety, or just the way that it seems like there's a lot of new automated features being introduced into vehicles that seem to encourage driver complacency. So whenever you see features that are introduced that are safety features, sometimes they don't always perform as well as we'd hope them to be. Some automakers are offering driver monitoring technology. So there are cameras in the car that will watch you as the driver and use computer algorithms to detect whether or not you're distracted or not and provide you a warning for you to snap back into it. But like all other driver assistance features, I think we need to look at independent evaluations. There have been independent evaluations of other assistance features that have shown that that they don't detect what they're supposed to detect every time, or they miss the bicyclists or they miss the motorcyclists. So automakers are always constantly improving these things, and so it's going to be a long road to get it up to a standard in which it's always going to work. The only other thing I mentioned, and we describe this in our report, is there's a company called AccuSensus that is offering what is basically automated enforcement for distracted driving. Again, they have cameras, safety cameras, and they use sophisticated algorithms to detect when they see a driver that appears to be distracted or on their cell phone. And that person would get a traffic ticket like they would like they would had run a red light or had gone above the speed limit. And that's really interesting. But of course, it runs into all of the baggage that we have about automated enforcement discussions in general in the United States, certainly. So whether or not that is something that is going to be widespread is anyone's guess. So a long story short is we have a lot of solutions out there, but I think that it's going to be a part of the solution, but probably not the entirety of it.
Well, I can add in all of the above that he just mentioned. And then just one or two other things that we do have now that are just showing, I think it's what fits you, whatever fits you best for your situation is going to be what's useful. For another thing is user-based insurance. People are signing up for the program where it's different types, where you either get an app or an ODB port, and it will give you insurance based on how you drive. Other apps you can keep in longer and can give you bigger discounts. And those are another opportunity for people. You can do it with your family or with your kids, and they show you reports on how you're driving. These also can do more than just distraction. They teach you, hard braking, helps you with your gas mileage, all kinds of things like that. For the states and for myself, working with these telematics companies, they have been a big help for us when we need that data. So it provides more real-time data, with the fatality data and the crash data we get from NHTSA. There's a significant time lag behind that. It's, over a year, and we all know that everything's vastly underreported. So if we could get more real-time information, so sometimes we'll call like Cambridge Mobile Telematics and we get a report from them that shows distracted driving in all the states. We were able to go into a recent state in Louisiana, I'll go ahead and say, and went in to say, look, you are the absolute worst with distracted drivers, almost double what the best state is and how many distracted drivers you have. That's why your law needs updating. That's why your crashes are so bad. And it really opened their eyes to see that data. So we could use things like that, data like that, to see our enforcement efforts working. When we do awareness campaigns and other types of things, do those bring a drop in use so we can gauge what's working, what's not? Because currently, I think we're at the place where we need to throw everything at the wall and see what works and what doesn't, because we're really at a new age and a turning point at this issue. But again, everything Russ said and everything more we can think of.
You're right. It's going to take a lot of hands in the pot, a lot of things to make it work. Russ, one of the report's recommendations is to conduct equitable, high visibility enforcement of like state and local distracted driving laws. And we've heard that distraction is a challenge for law enforcement. In fact, we actually have a question that was submitted about, the distracted driving bubble on the forms isn't usually checked. It's hard for police officers to make that judgment. You did talk a little bit about how emerging technology and that artificial intelligence of AccuSenses is able to address that. I was wondering if you had any other thoughts, especially with the question regarding police and their ability to make that assessment of distracted driving. And Jennifer, this might be good for you too.
Well, it's tough out there. It's tough for law enforcement and crash investigators to figure out what happened or what, in a crash investigation situation. The report describes this much more eloquently than I will, but there's sometimes no physical evidence that, sometimes they don't know if the phone was involved at all. I mean, there might be no indication of that might be the case. There are often no witnesses, especially in single vehicle crashes. If they decide that they want to try to access digital evidence within the phone, and we describe this in the report as well, there are a lot of barriers to doing that, or it's a process. They got to fill out paperwork, they have to apply for a warrant, they have to get data, they have to interpret the data. It's just really difficult to reconstruct distracted driving crashes. And so getting to that point where you can check the bubble in the form sometimes is just inherently challenging. And whether or not there are strategies to overcome that, to a certain extent, better training, just making officers cognizant or to have in mind that this might be a thread that they might want to go down. Certainly we have a sense that distracted driving is more widespread than the data might suggest. But beyond that, I think this is an area for growth and consideration for our community to figure out what more can we do to get more accurate crash data about distracted driving.
Yeah, and I would just want to add in that, I mean, with this crash data, we still don't have all the states even that have the box on the check report form. And then if it is on the form, when it gets transferred over to FARS, is it going to transfer over correctly? Because there have been mistakes in that. So there's always going to be those loopholes. And then those investigations take a long amount of time. How long are we going back and updating those initial crash reports? It's not that long of a period. And some can take even years as they go through the court system. So you can't rely on crash reports in distracted driving, but that's where, like AccuSense's camera technology comes in, where we supplement that with observational data. We know more people are on the phone. We're seeing them on the phone. We're seeing the videos they're posting when they're on the phone. We are seeing the telematics data showing distracted driving is up by 30% in those recent reports since pre-pandemic levels. And so now we get this AccuSenses data to also show that there is this big increase, and then we could go in, does the high visibility enforcement in that same area work? And how long does that work before we need to do another enforcement campaign? Because we're always going to go back to those old habits. This is a phone that is pulling our attention, and at all other times of the day, it's going to continue to pull our attention, and we're going to get more and more compelled to want that technology fix. So we're going to have to constantly be adapting.
Yeah, it is definitely a challenge, and you do need to adapt. And I love that you just answered that question, because that was exactly what somebody had submitted for us in the questions panel. So I'd like to remind everybody, if you do have a question, please use the questions panel. We do have time, especially at the end, dedicated to the questions that are submitted. So keep them coming. We have a lot. We can still take more. Russ, the report really argues that the shortcomings around the distracted driving really point to the need for a comprehensive, safe system approach. Are we effectively framing the distracted driving issue within that safe system framework?
So our report tries to do just that. We attempt to show how you can frame distracted driving prevention within the safe system. And I think that a lot of states and communities nowadays are beginning to organize all of their highway safety efforts within the safe system approach. And that's a good thing. And I think when you think about distracted driving, people listening to today's webinar probably are thinking to themselves, well, we've talked about a lot of different countermeasures, but none of them work 100% of the time. So that's really depressing. I'm not sure what we should even do or if we should even bother. But I think that what it points to is the need for a comprehensive systemic approach. We need to be trying all these different things because all of them chip away at the distracted driving problem in small ways, and that adds up. And I think that our community is beginning to think of things in more of a systemic, in a systemic way. What are the systemic problems that we can address that underlie the distracted driving behaviors that we're seeing and the crashes that they cause? I think, and we might talk about this later, I think traffic safety culture is a big part of that. And the poor traffic safety culture we have around distracted driving, and we need to start thinking about these systemic factors and these underlying issues. I think that's how we make progress forward.
You know, Jennifer, the report recommends the creation of a survivor advocacy organization based on MAD. Do you agree? What would the benefits be? What would the barriers be? What do you think about that?
Yeah, to a degree. It's a different time and a different age than back when MAD was created. It was easy, stuff is real time nowadays and it's constantly moving, and this is a big country with a lot of people and a lot of opinions and a lot of things going on, but it's also different in a lot of places. So things move at different paces and different speeds. So if there's a way that we could work this together, build on your local level, work in your local communities, and then build up to your state. Throughout your states, then again, just like building MAD, but from the ground up instead of the top down. Work through your state into regions. Have those regions work together, and everyone stay attuned to the national level. With all this great technology and innovation, we can attend things like webinars now. This is the norm. Before, we would have had to travel to go meet and to hold an event or to do a press event. Now you can connect through virtual things. You could hold meetings so much easier now. And so, what we do when we go into every state to pass a law is we try to bring everyone together. That's the big part that we really lost track of through all of this. And in the beginning of distracted driving, we all worked together. We were all meeting. We were all coordinating. We were all doing this together. And then we lost that. When we lost the direction of the leaders above us, and the search for data became so hard, we dusted it to the side. We lost track and the will to continue to meet and continue to put those ideas together. And so what we see going into these states, even if we're not successful on the legislation, by them going and building statewide coalitions, they're sharing resources, they're sharing expertise, they're sharing ideas, and they're moving the needle forward in a way that you're going to have your successes and your failures, but you're working together to come up with collaborative ideas and pulling together what you can. And it's brought in new ideas, new resources, new information, new funding. And so providing opportunities like that is how we see the path forward for this.
I think that the experience with MAD has done two things that I think are really instructive for the distracted driving discussion. The first thing is the way that MAD on a national level provides what they call victim services in a very organized way. Today, we'd probably call them survivor services, but making sure that the voices of survivors are heard, not just in legislative advocacy, but in court proceedings, in just about anything related to impaired driving that happens, whether it's with law enforcement or in the community. And today, I see a lot of distracted driving survivors going at it alone, which is unimaginable to do. And so what Matt was able to do is help to focus that in a really constructive and concentrated way. The other thing I think that Matt did is the way that they helped to affect a lot of progress in the culture that surrounds drunk driving. Today, we have this idea of the drunk driver is someone who has done something wrong, and we don't want to do that. And friends don't let friends drive drunk, and we have designated drivers, and all that stuff that doesn't exist for distracted driving. And it's kind of like the way it was before MAD. Back then, there was this cultural idea, well, everyone drinks and drives. I mean, that's us, that's everyone. And I think we feel the same way about distracted driving today. It's like, well, we know it's wrong, but everyone drives distracted. You know, distracted driving is me. But I think what MAD did, and what we need to do, is to create this separate cultural idea of the distracted driver as someone who's done something wrong, and present this new cultural idea. And you provide something that you let the people do the math. They will react like, I don't want to be that person. I'm going to change the behavior myself. You know, so we want to get to that point where we don't have to tell people what to do, as they internalize it and do the right thing on their own.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of those things that if people want to hear more about it, they can go to the report, you know, talking about this culture change strategy. We really are touching in this discussion on a lot of different points and recommendations. And so I did want to give just another plug to the report with a little bit of more information. You know, one thing that we haven't really talked about is the infrastructure bill, right? So did the infrastructure bill address distracted driving?
I can say that yes, it did. So the infrastructure bill that Congress passed last year was the reauthorization of all the federal transportation programs. And what that means is that it renews the grants that are available from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration for states to implement highway safety programs. And included within that is a grant specifically for states to use to put towards distracted driving prevention efforts. And GHSA advocated here in the DC area on behalf of our members and with many of our partners to improve those grants, to make it easier for states to be eligible for them, and to expand the purposes for which they can be used. So the bottom line is that in the next couple of years, we expect to see more funding going out that's earmarked specifically for distracted driving prevention among the states. So we're hoping that we can do a lot more good and save some more lives with all of that.
Well, and I'm going to follow that up with a question. I want to thank everybody that's submitting questions. I've been kind of weaving them in, but in FY20, NHTSA granted $149.6 million under 402 to all 50 states, and that 11% just went to 7 states. So what Jeffrey wants to know is, how do we get more money into the hands of the states to combat distracted driving?
Well, hopefully it's already starting. So a little bit of background about that. So the Title 23 Section 402 program that was referenced, it's one of the buckets of funding that's available to states from NHTSA. And this is funding that is allocated by formula. So there is a formula set out by law, by Congress, that's depending on road mileage and population. And so they crunch the numbers, and then every state gets a slightly different amount based on their proportions. But the end result of that is that you have smaller states typically get less funding, and they have less funding available to do important highway safety work. What we tried to do is work in another funding bucket that I mentioned before, the money that's set aside for distracted driving, that is contingent on states having certain kinds of distracted driving laws. And we, of course, encourage all states to pass strong distracted driving laws. But what we found was that a lot of states weren't being eligible for this grant because of technicalities. So we tried to work with some of our partners to figure out how can we make more states eligible, but still have this requirement that states have these laws in place. And so hopefully we've struck a happy medium, and I think the end result will be that more states will be eligible for this grant and thus be able to devote more funding to distracted driving in the near future.
Thank you. And I am going through these questions. You know, this is a little bit of a different question that we haven't really talked about, but and this is from Thomas, taking into consideration that humans are naturally distractible, how much emphasis is being given to better space management techniques in the educational model? So I didn't know if you knew what that was, but I'm thinking it might be the car.
Well, I would only say that I think it just goes back to this wider issues. We're not really sure how to change people's behaviors about distracted driving. You have the phone that all of us are used to accessing all day long for various purposes, but then you have this one part of your life where you're not supposed to use your phone. And it's hard for people to break that habit, right? And the report goes into this, but when you ask people, why do you drive distracted? They give really practical reasons. It's like they have to answer a call from work, they have to respond to a family member. It's not arbitrary. So a lot of the distracted driving messaging out there is kind of prohibitionist, and it's just don't do it, just say no. But that doesn't really get to those underlying motivations for why people do it. And we really, whether it's through the learning model or talking about space or whatever it is, we really need to crack the nut about how to change people's behaviors.
Thank you, and thank you everybody that is sending in their resources and ideas. We'll be sure to share them internally afterwards and make sure that we have them as resources. You know, Jennifer, I want to, you're very active in legislation. In fact, I know you were just today working on that. So what is the prognosis for the distracted driving legislation over the next few years, and what kinds of law changes are states exploring at this time?
Well, the second half I'll take first because it's the easy part, and that's just upgrading to hands-free laws. The INCOIL model bill, as well as the BitScript report, I have to say the short name of it, as well highlighted the key points it should be in a law for it to be able to be effectively enforced. And so upgrading the language to those key provisions, that's expanding so you can't watch, record, or stream video. You know, you don't want people watching movies or live broadcasting. That will cover many different things. That's what most states are working towards now. 24 states plus DC currently have those laws. The one thing in the states, the prognosis, it's not an easy road. I mean, these last 26 states, the public is there, widespread in support, over 80 to 90% support by public, all constituencies, all ages, all range, everyone, you know, all the businesses support. No, hardly anyone registers a card in support at a single hearing in any state in this country, yet it gets down to one or two lawmakers, you know, the silly list of excuses, and the bills lose. So I mean, painfully honest, it's not easy, but it all comes down to one or two people. So that is where we really have to make sure that no matter how trivial you think your part may be, everyone needs to play a part. Everyone needs to voice their opinion and speak up about how dangerous it is. Law enforcement needs to speak up about how hard it is to enforce the laws that they have, and that if they could be upgraded, they'd be easier, less controversial on the stops even, you know, and then that will provide a reduction in crashes and fatalities. Right now, we must act. I mean, crashes are up, fatalities are up. Phone use behind the wheel is skyrocketing, and so the time to act, I know I say this all the time, is now. But we've got to get these laws passed, because no matter what, you cannot change the culture and make people understand this is so dangerous that you cannot do it and you have to call others out for it if it's not even illegal. And so just getting that law passed is the step one priority, but everything else has to go at all times around that.
This is one of those issues that is ongoing, that is pervasive. We've talked about some of the challenges and we've talked about some recommendations. So now I'm actually really delighted to announce that up to 7 state highway safety offices will be awarded $30,000 each in unrestricted funds to implement recommendations in the report. And that's thanks to funding provided to General Motors. If you are a state highway safety office and you're thinking about applying, really focus on partnerships. That is essential and something that is really critical in kind of attacking this issue. The application is open, and I will be sending you an email later on today with the details. So that's kind of a nice follow-up to the report, which is kind of another plug now for the annual meeting. So GHSA's annual meeting will be in September in Louisville, and we will have more on distracted driving. So we'll have a general session with an expert panel, and we hope that you're able to join us. As with finding the reports on equity, finding this distracted driving report, other resources, just go to ghsa.org and it will have all of the information. Well, Russ, Jennifer, we are getting ready to wrap up. We only have a few minutes left. So Jennifer, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share?
I mean, just me pounding that drum again, that it's about connecting with others, you know, get those old groups back together, those old teams back together, and bring in those new ideas, bring in the old ideas, but bring in those new and young ideas, and then just get to work. We're up against a mountain, but we have a clean slate that we could really start with a running start and do some great things.
Thank you, Jennifer. Russ, final words, final thoughts.
Well, I would say that there's a tremendous amount of work being done on the state level, obviously, by Jennifer and many, many others to improve distracted driving laws and implement effective programs. And I'm more focused on the national level, and many of my peers at other national organizations are too. And I think now is an opportunity for us to kind of reset what we're doing on the national level on distracted driving, which frankly has kind of gone to the back burner for a little while because of other important issues. I mean, there's been a tremendous focus on things like drug impaired driving and pedestrian and bicyclist safety, and all of those are critical as well. But distracted driving is still out there, and we can't afford to let it go forgotten. So what I would hope that we can do is start to think about big picture things that we can accomplish on the national level, not focused on, say, passing a specific law or implementing a specific program, but the kinds of significant expenses that probably will only need to occur on the national level that can help us figure out what we need to do in all 50 states, whether it's doing legislative development or trying to do research or development for successful cultural change strategies. These things might be very expensive. And so I think we have an opportunity to all work together to try and try to rise the tide for all boats on this issue.
Yeah. Well, I want to give a huge thank you. Jennifer, we appreciate you being here. Russ, you too. Your two perspectives, I think, really allowed us to dig a little bit into the report, and hopefully everybody else will be very interested, and then they will dive into the report as well. And a big thank you to General Motors for their support of the report and the new grant program that we just announced. On behalf of GHSA, thank you everybody for joining us. Stay safe and enjoy your day. Bye everybody.